Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. U.S. President Trump is expected to pay his first visit to the Jewish state on May 22nd and 23rd. Those dates are significant because Israel will be celebrating Jerusalem Day, marking the 50th anniversary of the reunification of the city during the 1967 Six-Day War. Many expect Trump will either declare that Jerusalem is Israel's capital or may even decide to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Since the Trump administration took office, the U.S. has been standing with Israel at the UN in a dramatically new way.
It's still very early in my time as ambassador, but I think I can safely say that it's a new day for Israel at the United Nations.
Haley said that in a speech to more than 600 delegates from 90 countries at the World Jewish Congress in New York. She said the UN must stop singling out the Jewish state and that it needs to acknowledge that Iran is the real source of instability and terror in the Middle East. On May 3rd, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is scheduled to visit the White House and meet with President Trump for the first time. Earlier this year, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Jordan's King Abdullah, Egypt's President El-Sisi, and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince all came to the White House. Abbas's visit precedes what many believe to be a regional peace conference this summer. It's one more attempt to strike a peace deal between Israelis and Palestinians. Some put the blame on Israel's so-called occupation of the West Bank. But for years, Palestinians have waged a terrorism campaign against Israelis. But what's the reason behind this ongoing terrorism in Israel? While Palestinians point to anger over claims of Israeli occupation, others blame it on hopelessness and despair. Corruption in the Palestinian Authority could be driving young Palestinians to carry out terror attacks.
In general, people are not feeling safe. If anybody complains against someone who belongs to Fatah or the Palestinian Authority, or against somebody who is related to someone in the Palestinian Authority, the police reject the complaint.
Ahmed is one of some 2 million Arabs living under PA control in the West Bank, also known as Judea and Samaria. We've hidden his identity for his protection.
Even if somebody has been assaulted by someone who belongs to the Palestinian Authority and complains, they force him to back down, or he is threatened with death or jail.
The Palestinian Authority government is in Ramallah. Since its establishment in the mid-90s, the U.S. has committed about $5 billion in assistance. That would make Palestinians among the world's largest recipients of foreign aid.
Sometimes I believe that the Revolutionary Council is the council of corruption, and the Executive Committee is a committee to enforce the policy of corruption.
Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah says there's no corruption in the PA.
And usually if we have any report of any corruption, these people will be brought to justice. This is our policy. But in any country, mistakes can happen, and if anyone commits any of these issues, actually, he or she will be brought to justice.
According to a survey last year, more than 95% of Palestinians see their government as corrupt.
We have freedom of expression in Palestine. People can say anything.
Everybody knows that once you complain, you're putting your life in danger. In the policy of the Palestinian Authority, if a person has a problem with an official, even if this official asks him for a bribe, the person has to pay, even if he has nothing. The Palestinian Authority and the security services come against him, and nobody will protect him.
President Trump says he wants a peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians, but Ahmed says lack of peace isn't the problem.
I want the West and the United Nations to establish an inquiry delegation, an honest one, to inquire into all those crimes that are perpetrated against Palestinians by the Palestinian Authority. I am convinced that once justice will be served, hundreds of those guilty people will be put in prison.
Ahmed wants the West and the United Nations to pressure the PA to become an honest government. Until then, he says, there will be no state and terrorism will continue. In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem is one of CBN's largest productions to date. They work with nearly 250 actors and extras, including actual Israeli paratroopers. Every line of dialogue comes from records or diaries and interviews, and many of the battles were actually filmed in their exact locations. Ephraim Graham sat down with some of the members of the cast and crew to see how they made this epic film.
We shall destroy Israel and its inhabitants.
Arab nations surrounded Israel in 1967 with a battle plan
Our goal is clear: to wipe Israel off the map.
that outmanned and outgunned the young country.
The Syrian army, with its finger on the trigger, is united. I believe the time has come to begin a battle of annihilation.
The Jewish nation's survival hinged on a war that would last only 6 days. Those days are relived in the film In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, through the compelling stories of Israeli paratroopers.
If you leave here, you won't be coming back.
But if I don't leave, none of you will be coming back.
Production for In Our Hands took just under a year to complete, and one of the most pivotal battle scenes was shot right here at Ammunition Hill.
We did the shooting on this Jeep right here. This was actually originally Motagur's Jeep, the character played by Sharon.
On location at Ammunition Hill, we talked with actors Idan Barkai and Sharon Friedman.
My grandfather Aaron, was in the siege on Jerusalem before, and he was telling about it to me when I was young, and it was like, it's like unbelievable that I'm playing like the one that released the city and take it back, which is the place that my grandfather used to be here, unprotected.
Sharon plays 55th Brigade Commander Motagur. Idan plays Chief Intelligence Officer Arik Akman.
You want me to plan an entire war in 2 days? Yes? I'm at the university full time. I'm about to take my final exam. So, you'd better get to work.
Both of these gentlemen, very impressive in terms of their lives and their real life people.
Yeah.
Were you nervous about portraying people who people celebrate and are heroes?
You feel obligated to honor that person, but it's just Arik Ahmon is such a great person. I was humbled, I just tried to do my best, tried to give out the emotion and the tension of the moment I was in. Me myself, I served the army, but I never really fought in big, great wars, fortunately.
This film hits close to home for many cast members.
I myself was in the army in the paratroopers, so I could give my input to the part and the movie, but it was more real than just a memory of the Israel history.
Ishai Ben Moshe plays 71st Battalion Commander Yoram Zamosh. Were there any scenes that were difficult for you, or the most memorable scene for you? What was it?
The most memorable was with the actress Ruth Farhi, who plays the woman that gives me the flag of Israel to put on the wall. It was a very emotional scene.
I brought you a flag. This flag flew in the old city before we left in 1948. When you get to the wall, I want you to hang this flag.
Of course. It will be our honor.
Action.
Guiding these emotional scenes, producer and director Aaron Zimmerman.
There are so many amazing human stories. I didn't want to do a dry documentary, where you have old footage and you're saying, well, this regiment moved here and this regiment moved here.
Of course, this being a film about war, there's a lot of darkness in it. But I felt like there's also a lot of light in the film as well.
It was intentional to end on a high note, but it was also my intention not to give an empty, hey, yay, war, we won, because there was so many casualties. And there were so many injuries and people who, both mentally and physically, were never the same after that war.
Tell me who. גיורא אשכנזי, יאיר גולדברג, זקי דוד, יואב צורי.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News, Jerusalem.
At this year's APAC conference, CBN CEO Gordon Robertson spoke to an enthusiastic crowd about the film's inception.
Tell us, why did CBN decide to make this film? Why now?
Well, we were in the middle of shooting The Hope, which came out last year. And this is 2 years ago, and Aaron Zimmerman, the writer-director of that, said we need to do something on the Six-Day War. And so I said, okay, but realize if it's going to be released on the 50th anniversary, we can't extend the deadline. We've got to hit the deadline. And that was after, The Hope ended up into a delay process, and so it was some risk, but I said, yes, let's do it. And what I really liked about it was we were going to tell it from the standpoint of the soldiers of the 55th Paratrooper Brigade, that let's see the war from their eyes, and not do it as a documentary of the Six-Day War, but do it as a documentary of the men who actually fought.
Obviously, you had to make a lot of decisions about which parts to include, which parts not to include. One might think that you'd start the film with the beginning of the war, or maybe the Jordanian attack on Jerusalem. Instead, you start the war 3 weeks earlier during a period known as the waiting. Why was it important to include that period in the film?
Well, I thought it was important to show the world just how perilous the situation was for Israel, that it truly was a miracle that they won. There's a joke that was circulating around Tel Aviv in the airport. There was a sign that was put up, the last one to leave, please turn out the lights. So the state was truly at risk, and the fear was annihilation. They stockpiled body bags. They dug graves in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, anticipating not just soldiers, but civilians would be killed in huge numbers. And you have to tell that part of the story in order to explain what happened and just what an incredible success it was that Israel actually won that war.
From your research in the film and making the film, what did you learn about the IDF was actually doing during this period? Were they making plans to capture Jerusalem? Was that part of the original plan?
Absolutely. They had no plans to capture Jerusalem. And the 55th Paratrooper Brigade, which is what this movie is all about, they were intended to go to Sinai. They weren't intended to go to Jerusalem at all. And it's amazing that they were able to plan and prepare the battle for Jerusalem literally overnight.
Wow.
It was less than 12 hours. I think one of the great heroes, you don't hear his name a lot, Arik Akman, he was the intelligence officer. He put together the battle plan. And that was the plan they executed on. And he literally had hours to put that plan together.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. I know that we put this conference together. We work on it for all year long, and for somebody to do it that quickly for a conquest like that is amazing.
And you should know, you were in the idea.
I was. You use a lot of first-person narratives. You talked about Arik Akman. You use a lot of first-person narratives throughout this film. Why was it important to use actual narratives?
I think it personalizes it and it makes it accurate, for lack of a better word. When you hear dialogue in this film, it's words that were actually spoken. We don't make up lines. We don't make up conversations. There's research going into every line in the movie. And the idea is we really want to convey what the soldiers actually discussed, how the battle plans were created, what was going through their mind. And then we have interviews with the survivors, the members of the 55th Paratrooper Brigade who are alive today, giving their reflections now 49, 50 years later. What did they think about what they did? And I'd rather hear from them than hear from an historian. We do have experts in there, but the real driver for me is let's tell the story from the standpoint, the viewpoint of the IDF soldier.
When you talk about these soldiers who went through this, and you read these interviews and you see what happened, what really struck you as kind of the most poignant lessons that they take away from it today?
There's a scene where they're discussing the battle, and they say Jerusalem has not been conquered from the east since the time of King David. And then the response comes, well, this will be the second time, and then there's a pause, and the last time. And for me, that piece was, that just amazing. Seals it. That's a moment. That's a moment in the film.
It's very powerful. Earlier I had mentioned that in the last 50 years, under Israeli rule, people of all faiths are able to pray at their holy sites in the Old City. As a Christian, what does that mean to you?
My first trip to Israel was back in 1969, and I remember the joy at the Western Wall. And then I went again repeatedly throughout the 1970s. There was a moment on Christmas Eve where we had a candlelight service outside the town of Bethlehem. And so we're on a hill overlooking, and Bedouin shepherds wanted to see what these crazy Americans were doing with candles on Christmas Eve, and they brought their flocks up. They were watching over their flocks by night. It was a moment when we shared a service with Bedouins with their sheep overlooking Bethlehem. Today, I can't go to Bethlehem. It's not safe for me to do that. And so when the UN comes out and says East Jerusalem is under a blatantly illegal occupation, I go, no. To turn East Jerusalem over the Palestinians, as a Christian, that means I can no longer go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I can no longer go to the Garden of Gethsemane. I can no longer go to the Mount of Olives. I can no longer go to the Western Wall. I can't imagine an Israel like that.
Wow. Well, Gordon, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the full film. Thank you very much.
This week, Israel marks its 69th birthday as a nation. Like many Americans, Israelis celebrate their independence with picnics, parties, and fireworks. But those celebrations often pale in comparison to the miracle that led to their independence. Here in Independence Hall on May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the formation of the State of Israel. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people were a nation once again.
This is where Israel was born. When people come here, they are astonished to see this place. Most of the people that visit here, their first reaction is, this is it? That's all you have here?
Ben-Gurion and his team looked for an inconspicuous place to declare statehood. At the time, Independence Hall, one of the first buildings in Tel Aviv, was an art gallery. During a 1978 renovation, the decision was made to take the building back to its original look at the time of the declaration.
Traveling in Israel will teach you that God has a tendency to perform his best miracles in the most humble places. This place is one of those places.
According to Isaac Dror, who heads education at the Hall, the establishment of Israel shook the world and became a haven for the Jewish people.
How many people prayed for it every day when the Jews said next year in Jerusalem and next year in Jerusalem? That's what they meant.
When Israel declared its independence, dancing filled the streets. But the celebration was short-lived. The very next day, armies of 5 Arab nations invaded the newborn state.
When it comes to the story of the War of Independence, we don't have many answers there. Very hard for us to explain. Call it a miracle, call it whatever you want, but we are here.
130,000 people visit this tiny hall each year to hear about the miracle of Israel, including tourists like this group from Massachusetts.
I didn't expect it to be so moving. My whole life, Israel has always been here. So I think in some ways took it for granted. And now I, felt like I was here that day.
Across the street is this monument with a scripture from Jeremiah. Again I will build you, and you shall be rebuilt, O Virgin of Israel. Surrounded by skyscrapers and a new generation visiting the hall, it's testament to God's faithfulness to his promise to build and rebuild, the Jewish state and its people. Chris Mitchell, CBN News at Independence Hall in Tel Aviv, Israel. Dry Bones is one of the most well-known cartoons in the world. It's read by millions, and the creative genius behind the cartoon, Yaakov Kirshen, explains how he came up with the unusual name for his work.
When I came to Israel and decided I would start doing a cartoon, I thought, well, I needed a name, like Kirshen's Corner, with corner spelt with a K. And I kept thinking, what should it be? And then I realized that one of the things that had brought me to Israel was my reading of the book of Ezekiel. And in the book of Ezekiel, this guy Ezekiel, who lived 2,600 years ago, saw a vision of what for him was the far future. And that was of a time when it looked like the world had destroyed the Jewish people. But at that point, we would come out of our graves, and the image he saw was of a valley filled with dry bones. And these bones came together, like the knee bone connected to the shin bone and all like that. And in that imagery, he saw the rebuilding of the Jewish state. He saw the coming together and the ingathering of the Jewish people. He saw the rebuilding of the cities and the planting of the trees. And therefore, if I was going to do a cartoon about what was happening today, all I could do would be to add to what he had seen incredibly 2,600 years ago. And so I decided to call it Dry Bones, thinking that everyone would understand.
Well, that's it for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.